Rhiannon Giddens is an American singer, songwriter, and historian. Growing up in North Carolina with a white father and a Native and African American mother, she became aware of the converging and clashing of all of these different cultures that made up her life and her identity from a rather young age. She has gained increasing recognition in the past decade as she won a Grammy with her band in 2011 and became a unique voice in the American music scene as well as scholarship within this field. Her expertise spans country, folk, classical, bluegrass, and gospel genres, as she uses music to educate audiences about stories at the intersections of history, culture, race, equity, and the arts. Her commitment to education and music have not gone unnoticed. She received a MacArthur Genius Fellowship in 2017. It's a program that supports artists who wish to spread social awareness, justice, and change through their work. She was also named Artistic Director of the Silk Road Ensemble in 2020, an organization founded by famous cellist Yo-Yo Ma that aims to make a positive impact across borders through the arts. She has continued to create music as she has released multiple albums, curated concerts, and composed music for an opera based on a slave narrative and a ballet about the evolving perception of the black female body. So, all in all, Rhiannon Giddens seems to be quite a special type of artist that inserts activism in her music. But what is it exactly that makes Giddens and her work so remarkable? We first have to take a look at the history of country music that lies at the very base of her story, and then see how this is reflected in her music. When you think of country music, chances are you are thinking of a white man in cowboy hats and cowboy boots, dressed in flannel maybe or some jeans, and this image would not be unjustified, seeing as the genre is dominated by white men. Just take a look at the Rolling Stones Top 100 Greatest Country Artists of All Time. Coming in at number 31, Charlie Pride is the only African American musician who made the list, taking his place among the 75 male artists versus the 23 female artists and the two mixed acts. So, despite its current image, the roots of country music and other similar genres, such as folk, are actually a mix of influences coming from different races and different cultures, of which African American culture claims a significant piece. Country music originated in the early 20th century among working class Americans living in the South. Generations of musicians had blended English ballads with Celtic and Irish songs, adding influences from various European immigrants who settled nearby. What African American culture added to the mix came in the form of jazz and blues inspirations, as well as the development of some of country's initial staple instruments, the banjo and the fiddle. The banjo was created by enslaved Africans and their descendants in the Caribbean and colonial North America, where it became an important part of their culture in slave labor camps, on plantations, and in the other settings that the enslaved were forced to live their lives. The earliest references can be traced back to the 17th century. And through the 1830s, the banjo was exclusively known as an African American tradition with a West African heritage. What further distinguishes the banjo is that it did not come from Africa as is as an unaltered tradition, but rather the banjo's creation was the result of a blending between West African and European forms. And because of this, it truly became an American instrument that eventually also became popular with white Americans from the 19th century onwards. The fiddle can be seen to have a similar story. Not only can part of its history in America be traced back to European fiddling traditions and histories, but several West African cultures that many enslaved people were taken from showed prominent fiddling traditions and histories of their own. Ultimately, the roots of country music are made up of an initial convergence and exchange of different cultures. This did continue in certain ways, as white country musicians in the 20th century, such as Bill Monroe and Hank Williams, revealed black musicians as early mentors and inspirations. So then why and how did country music become such a wide genre? One of the biggest causes was the musical segregation of Southern music invented by the recording industry in the 1920s. As the commercial recording of music became more popular and widespread at the time, the recording industry pushed black musicians into the race music categories, which consisted of jazz, blues, and gospel and such, while white musicians were marketed as being part of the hillbilly category, aka true country music. Even if a black musician's song had all the characteristics of a country song, it often did not matter. It was just decided that black people did not make country music. This divide was so effective and became so ingrained in society that it is still tangible today. Outside of the music industry, changes in representation and association also had a significant role to play in country music losing its blackness. Already in the 19th century, some African Americans started to distance themselves from what used to be their culture. Earlier, I mentioned that the banjo became popular with white Americans around the same time. It has been argued that these two developments are connected through the popularity of minstrel shows in the 1800s. As white Americans created stereotypical and racist images of African American culture for entertainment, in which they included elements such as the fiddle and the banjo, black Americans were less and less inclined to associate themselves with these instruments. Consequently, the banjo and the fiddle became known as white instruments. Not only that, the mass migration of African Americans in the 20th century out of the South to bigger cities caused African American culture to be more associated with being urban rather than rural or country, and caused instruments such as the piano, the trumpet, or the saxophone to be associated with black musicians. And that are some of the main narratives on how country music became white. Researching these histories, both as a scholar and as a musician, Giddens aims to not only make people aware of the forgotten black origins of early country music and other Americana genres in general, but also reclaim them through her work. One of the most evident and prominent gestures of their reclamation is the central role that the banjo plays in her process. Not only is it heard in the majority of her songs, giving them that old Americana feel that is not often heard anymore, but Giddens has expressed how playing the banjo makes her feel connected to her ancestors and allows her to create her art.
This is a replica of a banjo from 1858 that I'm playing, made by a man named Jim Hartle. And I've always loved the banjo, but it was only when I discovered this, after having visited the Gambia and studied a pre-banjo instrument called the akonting, that I found a way to access my ancestors with this instrument. And to write new music with it.
Through the way she purposely frames her personal usage of the banjo, she shows how it is possible for it to not just be associated with painful memories of minstrel shows and the ensuing racism and appropriation, but a connection to times before when it was such an important part of African American communities in the South. Another notable thing she does is the reimagining of songs by other artists and traditional songs that have been passed down over time. On her first solo album, Tomorrow Is My Turn, we hear covers of Don't Let It Trouble Your Mind by Dolly Parton, She's Got You by Patsy Cline, Last Count Words by Geeshie Wiley, and Shake Sugaree by Elizabeth Cotton. While Parton, Cline, and Cotton enjoy a certain fame in varying degrees, Wiley's life and work have largely remained undiscovered and underrepresented. The traditional music featured on this album ranges from the folk song Waterboy, based on the young boys in charge of supplying workers on plantations with water, the spiritual Round About the Mountain, the gospel song Up Above My Head, to the traditional Irish ballad O Love Is a Teasin', and supposed Scottish ballad Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair, which was popularized by Nina Simone. The only original song by Giddens on this album, Angel City, sounds like an old traveler song, yet describes a slightly more modern story of feeling lost in Los Angeles. All in all, this album symbolizes what the forgotten essence of country and other American roots music is. It's a mix of old and new, of influences stemming from different cultures who are not divided but borrow from each other and share with each other. This message is reflected in our other albums as well. with original music and traditional music and covers alternating each other. Giddens further emphasizes the importance of these amalgamations, especially when it comes to throwing African American influences in the mix by including and blending multiple genres. Birmingham Sunday takes you to church with its gospel sounds, the trumpet in Hey Baby gives it a jazzy feel, and the beat added in Black is a Color makes it sound like a hip hop or R&B song, just to name a few examples.
On Birmingham Sunday, the blood ran like wine, and the choirs kept singing of freedom. Black is the color of my true love's hair. His lips are like some roses fair. The sweetest face and the neatest hands. I love the ground whereon he stands.
As for the topics and themes that Giddens sings about in her songs, they span almost the entire history of the United States of America and address issues and hardships undergone by African Americans and their ancestors. From slavery to police brutality, Giddens brings to life both old and new stories. Her second solo album, Freedom Highway, opens with At the Purchaser's Option, a title inspired by an 18th century slave advertisement. The song tells of a mother lamenting her life and the doomed fate of her child born into bondage. I've got a babe, but shall I keep him? 'Twill come the day when I'll be weeping. But how can I love him any less? This little babe upon my breast. I've got a body, dark and strong. I was young, but not for long. You took me to bed, a little girl, left me in a woman's world. Day by day, I work the line, every minute, over time. Fingers nimble, fingers quick, my fingers bleed to make you rich. Julie describes a conversation between an enslaved woman and her mistress moments before the Union Army arrives to liberate the plantation and shows the complexities of their relationships between the enslaved and the slaver. Julie, oh Julie, won't you lie? If they find that trunk of gold by my side. Julie, oh Julie, you tell them men that trunk of gold is yours, my friend. Mistress, oh mistress, I won't lie. If they find a trunk of gold by your side. Mistress, oh mistress, that trunk of gold is what you got when my children you sold. Meanwhile, Better Get It Right the First Time mourns the loss of black men at the hands of police. Did you stand your ground? Is that why they took you down? Or did you run that day? Baby, they shot you anyway. Whether it happened 200 years ago or is still going on, Giddens wants it all on display. And so, through her music, Rhiannon Giddens not only puts a spotlight on the forgotten origins of country and American roots music, but also reclaims her spot as a woman of color honoring her ancestors and her culture in an industry that has been so overwhelmingly white. The mixing of genres, eras, themes, and artists in her work symbolizes a fusion that lies at the heart of country and roots music. It is music made possible by multiple cultures and races, including significant African American contributions, despite what the impacts of racial segregation have made us believe. In fact, Black country, folk, and roots artists and their stories and heritage are still very much alive.